My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 32 years old. 7 years ago, I sat at my desk at Caldwell and Reed Architecture in Columbus, Ohio, and watched my sister walk into a meeting that should have been mine. She was carrying a portfolio I had spent 8 months building. My name was nowhere on the cover. I remember staring at the conference room door as it closed behind her, thinking maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe I had misread the room number. Maybe she was just borrowing it to show a colleague. But I hadn't made a mistake. And she wasn't just borrowing it. She was presenting my community center project to the National Awards Committee as her own. I was 25 years old. It was the first design I had ever truly believed in. 300 hours of work. Nights, weekends, holidays. A proposal for a multi-use community center in one of Columbus's most underserved neighborhoods. And in one morning, it stopped being mine. I didn't run into the meeting. I didn't pound on the glass. I sat at my desk with my hands flat on the keyboard and told myself to breathe. That was the beginning of a silence that would last 7 years. And I want to tell you exactly how it ended. Let me take you back to the summer I designed that project. I had been at Caldwell and Reed for 2 years, and I was still the youngest person on the junior team. My sister Brooke was a senior associate, 3 levels above me and 4 years older. She had gotten me the job, a fact she reminded me of at least once a month. The community center project came through a nonprofit called Hartwell Foundation. They had a vacant lot in the Linden neighborhood and a small budget. Nobody senior wanted it. It wasn't glamorous. There was no commission attached. But I read the brief and something happened in my chest. A feeling I hadn't had since architecture school. I asked my manager, Doug, if I could take it on as a secondary assignment. He shrugged and said fine, as long as my main projects didn't suffer. So I worked on it in every gap I had. Early mornings before the office filled up. Lunch breaks. Weekends at my kitchen table with black coffee and floor plans spread across every surface. I wasn't designing a building. I was designing a future for a neighborhood that had been told for decades that it didn't deserve one. By October, I had something real. Something I was proud of. And that was when I made the mistake of telling Brooke. I told her over dinner at our parents' house in Westerville. It was a Sunday, pasta and red wine, the kind of evening where everyone feels warm and honest. I pulled up the renderings on my laptop and walked the family through it. A central atrium. A rooftop garden. Flexible classroom space. A small medical clinic on the ground floor. My mother, Patricia, leaned in close to the screen. Mara, this is beautiful, she said. My father, Dennis, nodded slowly, the way he did when he was genuinely moved. Brooke was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you should submit this to the Hartwell National Design Competition. They have a community category. The winner gets a feature in Architecture Today and a development grant. I hadn't even thought about competition. I had just been trying to make something good. But Brooke pulled up the competition website right there at the table. Deadline was 6 weeks away. She helped me log the entry. She offered to review my documentation package. 2 sets of eyes are always better, she said, smiling. And because she was my sister, because I had grown up trusting her, because she had helped me get the job that was letting me build this thing, I said yes. I sent her the full file folder that night. Every drawing, every model, every word of the design narrative I had written. I sent it all. 3 weeks later, I noticed something was wrong. I had sent Brooke a revised version of the structural drawings on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she hadn't responded. I stopped by her office and she was on a call, so I left a note on her desk asking about the files. She emailed me that evening. All good, still reviewing, don't stress. The following Monday, Doug pulled me aside before the morning meeting. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Brooke submitted a competition entry last week," he said carefully. "She used the Linden Project." My stomach turned to ice. "What do you mean she used it?" He shifted in his chair. "She listed herself as lead designer. You're in the acknowledgments as support staff." I asked to see the submission. He hesitated, then turned his monitor toward me. There it was. My renderings. My floor plans. My design narrative with a few sentences reordered. And at the top, in clean bold font, lead designer Brooke Ellison. Contributing technician Mara Ellison. I sat in that chair for a long time. The office moved around me. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. And I sat there reading my own work with someone else's name above it, trying to understand how I had let this happen. I went to Brooke that afternoon. I was calm. I had decided on the walk to her office that I would be calm. I sat across from her desk and I said, quietly, "You listed yourself as lead designer on my project." She didn't flinch. She leaned back and folded her hands and said, "Mara, the project needed a senior name attached for the committee to take it seriously. You're a junior associate." They would have screened it out in round one. "It's my design," I said. "Every line of it." She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was about to explain something to me like I was 12 years old. "You worked on it on company time, on a company brief, using company software. Technically, it belongs to the firm. I'm doing you a favor by submitting it at all." I told her I was going to talk to Doug. She nodded slowly. "You can do that," she said. "But think about who brought you into this firm. Think about what that conversation looks like for both of us." I left her office. I went to the bathroom at the end of the hall. I ran cold water over my wrists and stared at the tile wall and told myself this was not the end. But I didn't go to Doug. Not that day. And Brooke knew I wouldn't. I went to Doug 2 days later. He listened to everything. He looked uncomfortable the entire time, which told me he already knew more than he was letting on. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mara, you're a valuable part of this team." What Brooke did was technically within the firm's IP guidelines, since the project originated on company hours. I told him it started as my personal proposal, submitted to the firm after the fact. He looked at his desk. "I hear you. And between us, I think she should have credited you properly. But making a formal complaint about a senior associate, about your sister, that's going to follow you here. Is that what you want?" It wasn't a threat. It was a warning from someone who genuinely liked me. But the effect was the same. I was being told to stay quiet. I drove home that night and sat in my car outside my apartment for 40 minutes. I thought about calling my mother, but I already knew how that conversation would go. Patricia Ellison had always believed Brooke was the one going places. Not because she was cruel, but because Brooke had always been louder, shinier, more visible. I was the one who worked in the background. I had been the background my entire life. So I went inside, poured a glass of water, and started updating my resume. The Hartwell competition results came out in February. Brooke placed second in the community category. There was a small ceremony at a hotel downtown. The firm sent a group. Brooke wore a red dress and gave a speech about designing with empathy. Architecture Today ran a quarter-page feature. There was a photo of her smiling beside a rendering of the Linden Atrium. My atrium. I didn't attend the ceremony. I told Doug I had a conflict. He didn't push. But my colleague Iris texted me a photo from the event, just the article photo, no caption. She didn't need one. I stared at it on my phone for a long time. Then I saved it to a folder I labeled simply Record. I had started keeping records the week after I talked to Doug. Every original file, timestamped and saved to 2 external drives and a cloud account Brooke had no access to. Every email thread. Every version history from the project software, showing my login credentials on every edit. I didn't know what I was saving it for. Maybe nothing. But it felt important to have proof that the work had been mine, even if no one was looking at it yet. At the time, saving files was the only power I had. So I used it. I gave my notice in April. I told Doug it was about growth opportunities, which was partially true. The real truth was that I couldn't walk past Brooke's office every day and feel what I felt when I looked at her. Not anger, not exactly. Something colder. A kind of grief for a version of my sister I had trusted and a version of myself I could feel shrinking the longer I stayed. I left Caldwell and Reed on a Friday afternoon with a box of personal items and a very clear sense of what I was walking away from. What I wasn't sure about was what I was walking toward. I moved to Chicago 3 months later. A small firm called Meridian Studio had a junior position open. They specialized in public interest design, affordable housing, community infrastructure. Exactly the work I cared about. The salary was less than what I had made in Columbus. The office was on the 4th floor of an old industrial building with drafty windows and a coffee machine that never quite worked right. I loved it immediately. My manager there was a woman named Claudette Warwick. On my first day, she handed me a project brief, showed me my desk, and said, "We don't do ego here. We do good work." I sat down, opened the brief, and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. I felt like myself. I didn't talk to Brooke for 2 years after I left Columbus. My parents didn't push it. Patricia mentioned once that Brooke had asked about me, and I said, "I'm sure she's doing great," and changed the subject. Dennis, who had always been more perceptive than my mother gave him credit for, looked at me at Christmas dinner that year with an expression that said he understood more than he was saying. I built a life in Chicago the way I had built that first project. One careful piece at a time. At Meridian, I moved from junior designer to project lead within 18 months. Claudette trusted me with bigger and bigger briefs. I led a redesign of a transitional housing facility in Pilsen. I oversaw a park renovation in Englewood that won a local civic design award. Small wins, real wins. Meanwhile, back in Columbus, Brooke's career was flourishing on the back of the Hartwell placement. She'd made principal associate at a bigger firm, a place called Vance Greer. She was presenting at conferences. She had a following on LinkedIn. I followed her profile from an account she didn't know was mine, not obsessively, just enough to know what she was claiming. She had built an entire identity around being a designer with a gift for community-centered work. An identity that had its roots in a project she had never actually designed. In my 3rd year at Meridian, Claudette told me about the National Architecture and Community Design Awards. It was a major competition. Juried by a panel of 12 architects, critics, and urban planners from across the country. The winner in the public interest category received $50,000 in project funding, a feature in 3 national publications, and an invitation to speak at the National Urban Design Summit in Washington. "I want you to submit the Pilsen project," Claudette said. "It's ready. You're ready." I worked on the submission for 2 months. Every drawing, every narrative, every supporting document was meticulous. I was thorough the way people are thorough when they have been burned before. I checked every timestamp. I confirmed every credit line. And I submitted it in January under my name alone. Then I waited. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone in Columbus. I had learned a long time ago that sharing things before they were real only created opportunities for them to be taken. While I waited, I kept working. That spring, I also started seeing a therapist named Dr. Osei. She had a quiet office near Wicker Park with plants in every corner. I had told myself for years that I was fine. Dr. Osei helped me understand the difference between being fine and being numb. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in March. I was eating lunch at my desk, a sandwich and a sparkling water, reviewing shop drawings. My phone rang. The number was a Washington, D.C. area code I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. Ms. Ellison? The voice was calm and professional. This is Renata Cole from the National Architecture and Community Design Awards Committee. I'm calling to let you know that your submission for the Pilsen Transitional Housing Redesign has been selected as a finalist in the Public Interest category. I put my sandwich down. We'd also like to speak with you about something else, Renata continued. During our review process, we cross-reference finalist submissions against our archive of prior entries. We found a 2018 submission that shares significant elements with work in your portfolio documentation. My throat tightened. She was talking about the Linden Project. The original submission listed a Brooke Ellison as lead designer. But based on your portfolio's version history and the materials you submitted, our technical review team has questions about the original attribution. I sat very still. We'd like to schedule a call with you and a documentation review. Nothing adversarial. We simply want to get the record right. I said yes. Then I hung up and sat quietly for a long time, staring at the plants on the windowsill across the office, and felt something beginning to move after 7 years of stillness. I called Claudette that evening and told her everything. The Linden Project. Brooke. Doug. The submission. The records I had kept. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you still have the original files?" I told her I had every version, every timestamp, every email, on 2 drives and a cloud backup. She was quiet for a moment. "Mara," she said, "send them to Renata Cole tomorrow morning." The documentation review call happened 2 weeks later. 3 people from the awards committee, their technical reviewer, and a records specialist. I shared my screen and walked them through the version history of the Linden Project files, starting from the first sketch file, dated 14 months before Brooke submitted it. Every edit was logged under my login credentials. The narrative document had 17 revision saves, all under my name. The only contribution Brooke had made to the original submission, visible in the metadata, was adding her own name to the cover sheet. The technical reviewer was very quiet during that portion. When it was over, Renata thanked me and said they would be in touch within 30 days. They needed to contact Brooke and give her the opportunity to respond. I said I understood. I closed the laptop, went to my kitchen, and made a cup of tea with hands that were very slightly shaking. Not from fear. From the strange, unfamiliar feeling of being believed. During those 30 days, I tried to stay in my normal rhythm. Morning runs along the lakefront. Work. Therapy. Dinners with my friend Petra, who was a high school art teacher and cared nothing about architecture awards, which was exactly what I needed. But some nights I lay awake thinking about what Brooke might be saying to the committee. She was smart. She was a very good talker. She had spent 7 years polishing a version of events where she had mentored a junior colleague on a project they developed together. I had to trust the files. The files didn't talk. They just showed what had actually happened. And then, on a Thursday evening, something unexpected landed in my inbox. An email from Brooke. Subject line, "We should talk." I stared at it for a long time before I opened it. The email was 3 paragraphs. In the first, she said she had been contacted by the awards committee and had been asked about the Linden project. In the second, she said she thought it would be better if we spoke before things became complicated. In the third, she mentioned that she was in the middle of a major pitch for a public housing development contract in Columbus worth several $1,000,000, and that any disruption to her professional standing at this moment would be, quote, devastating to both of us. I read the third paragraph twice. After 7 years of silence, the first thing she reached out for was not an apology. It was a warning dressed up as a concern. I didn't reply to Brooke's email. I forwarded it to Renata Cole instead, with a single line, "For your records." 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Mara, Brooke says there's some kind of problem with an award thing and she's very upset. Do you know what's going on?" I had known this call was coming. I had thought about what to say. I told my mother the truth. Not the version I had softened in my head out of habit, the actual truth. Brooke had taken my project files, put her name on them, and submitted them as her own. When I tried to address it, I was told to be quiet. I had left the firm because of it. I had been in Chicago for 4 years building a career from scratch, while Brooke built hers on a foundation she had stolen. There was a long silence. Then my mother said, "Mara, you know Brooke has a big presentation coming up." This timing, I stopped her gently. "Mom, she stole my work." That's the whole sentence. Another silence. "I'll call you Sunday," I said, and I hung up. I sat on my couch for a while after that. It had felt different from what I expected. Not triumphant. Just clear. Like setting down something very heavy that I had been carrying so long I had forgotten what my hands felt like empty. My father called the next evening. Dennis Ellison was not a man who called without thinking carefully about what he was going to say first. He was a retired civil engineer. He believed in evidence. He spoke slowly. "Mara, your mother told me the conversation. I want you to know I looked up the Hartwell entry from 2018. Brooke's submission. And then I looked at what you sent me from your portfolio last Christmas. The Linden drawings. They are identical." I didn't say anything. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For not asking questions in 2018. For not looking closer. For letting the dinner conversation move on." My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected. My father was not a man who apologized easily. When he did it, it meant something. "It's okay, Dad." "It isn't," he said. "But I'd like to make it better if you'll let me." He asked me to tell him everything. So I did. For nearly 2 hours, I told my father the full story. He asked careful, precise questions, the way engineers do, and he listened to every answer without interrupting. At the end he said, "What do you need from me?" It was a simple question. Nobody had asked it in a very long time. "Just this," I told him. "Just this conversation." And I meant it. The awards committee sent their formal findings to both me and Brooke on a Friday morning. I was in a project meeting when my phone buzzed on the table. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and opened the email. The committee's technical review had concluded that the Linden Community Center project, submitted to the 2018 Hartwell National Design Competition, had been incorrectly attributed. Based on version history, file metadata, and supporting documentation provided by Mara Ellison, the committee determined that Mara Ellison was the sole designer of record. The committee was revising the historical record to reflect this. And the original second-place Hartwell Award, which had been given to Brooke Ellison, was being rescinded. I leaned against the hallway wall and read it 3 more times. In the 4 years since I had moved to Chicago, I had told myself that the truth didn't need to be recognized to be real. that I knew what I had built, that the work itself was the proof. I still believed all of that. But I stood in that hallway and I let myself feel it. The recognition, the correction, the formal, documented acknowledgement that I had been right all along. Then I put my phone in my pocket and walked back into the meeting because there was still a project to finish and a team depending on me, and that was who I was. The news moved through the architecture world faster than I expected. The committee's decision wasn't public in a dramatic way, but in a professional community the size of architecture, word moved like water. Within a week, 2 people I had never met emailed me to say they had heard what happened and respected how I had handled it. Claudette posted a carefully worded note on Meridian's firm page about the importance of proper attribution in design work. She didn't name anyone. She didn't need to. In Columbus, the effects were immediate. Brooks' pitch for the public housing contract was already in its final stage when the committee's finding landed. The development group overseeing the contract was connected to the Hartwell Foundation, the same foundation whose competition had given Brooke her breakthrough. One of the foundation's board members had been on the original 2018 judging panel. He had championed her entry. When the rescission reached him, he pulled the firm's background file and started asking questions. The pitch, which had been essentially Brooks to win, was placed on hold pending a portfolio review. Brooke emailed me again. This time the subject line was, "Please." I opened it. It was longer than the first one. It started with the word "sorry." But by the 3rd paragraph it had arrived at the pitch, the contract, the review, and whether there was anything I could do to help. I closed it. I didn't forward it this time. I just closed it and went back to work. 3 weeks before the National Architecture and Community Design Awards ceremony in Chicago, Claudette called me into her office with a look I couldn't read. "There's something you should know," she said. "The development group in Columbus, the one reviewing Brooks' pitch, they have been in contact with us. They're asking about you." I sat forward. "They saw the committee findings. They looked up your work here at Meridian. They want to know if you'd be open to a conversation about the public housing project." I stared at her. "The same contract Brooke was pitching for?" Claudette nodded and allowed herself a small smile. "They want to speak with the designer of record on the Linden project. The real one." I left her office and walked to the window at the end of the hall and looked out over the city. 7 years ago, I had walked out of Caldwell and Reed with a box of personal items and no certainty about anything. I had spent those years building something real, quietly, without applause, without recognition. And now the thing Brooke had taken was leading people back to me. Not because I had chased it. Because the work had always been good and good work, eventually, finds the right room. I called Dr. Osei that evening. We talked for a long time. Not about strategy. About what it felt like to be seen after a very long time of not being seen. I met with the Columbus Development Group over a video call the following week. For people from the Hartwell Foundation Board and 2 members of the city's planning office. They asked me about the Linden project, about my work at Meridian, about my philosophy in designing for underserved communities. I answered every question honestly. I told them about the neighborhood research I had done in 2017, about the community listening sessions I had attended on my own time, about why the rooftop garden mattered, and why the ground floor clinic mattered, and why the atrium had been designed the way it had. I could hear in the quality of their silence that they were hearing something they had not heard before. At the end of the call, one of the board members, a man named Calvin Ward, said quietly, "We heard a version of this design's origin story in 2018 that was missing most of what you just told us." I said I understood. He said, We'd like to revisit the public housing conversation. Formally. If you're open to it. I said I was open to it. After the call, I sat at my desk for a long moment. Then I opened a new project file, gave it a working title, and started sketching. Because that is what I do. I work. Even when, maybe especially when, the world is finally beginning to pay attention. The night before the awards ceremony, I was in my hotel room in the West Loop when my phone rang. It was Brooke. I let it ring. Then I thought about the last 7 years. About every version of this call I had rehearsed in my head. About what I had imagined I would feel. Then I picked up Mara. Her voice was quiet in a way I hadn't heard before. Not the managed calm she used in professional situations. Something rawer underneath it. I know you don't have any reason to talk to me. I didn't say anything. The contract is gone, she said. The firm put me on leave while they do an internal review of attribution practices. They found 2 other projects. I closed my eyes. I hadn't known about other projects. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she said. I just needed to say it to you directly. What I did was wrong. It was wrong in 2018, and I knew it was wrong when I was doing it, and I told myself a story about why it was okay, and I have been telling myself that story for 7 years. The room was very quiet. I'm sorry, Mara. I'm genuinely sorry. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I said, I hear you. I didn't say I forgive you. I wasn't there yet. But I didn't hang up either. We talked for 20 more minutes. It wasn't resolution. It was a beginning. And beginnings, I had learned, were enough to start with. The awards ceremony was held at the Auditorium Theater on Michigan Avenue. Claudette had flown in from Meridian. My father had driven up from Westerville. He had not told my mother he was coming. He had simply gotten in the car. When I saw him in the lobby in a sport coat I recognized from my college graduation, I felt something I couldn't name precisely. Something between gratitude and the particular ache of a wound that is beginning, carefully, to close. We found our seats together. The hall was full of architects, planners, critics, and civic leaders from across the country. I was a finalist. I didn't know yet whether I had won. The program moved through several categories: student awards, historic preservation, sustainable design, and then the presenter, a woman named Dr. Yvonne Tate, who had been building affordable housing for 30 years, stepped to the microphone for the public interest category. She spoke for several minutes about the meaning of design in communities that had been overlooked. She talked about the difference between buildings that serve people and buildings that see them. Then she opened the envelope. The 2025 National Architecture and Community Design Award in Public Interest goes to Mara Ellison for the Pilsen Transitional Housing Redesign. The room filled with applause. I stood up. My father stood up beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder for just a moment before I walked toward the stage. That 1 second. That was the one I will remember longest. I stood at the podium and looked out at 400 people in formal clothes, and I thought about a kitchen table in Columbus with coffee and floor plans spread everywhere. I thought about the bathroom at the end of the hall at Caldwell and Reed, cold water on my wrists, telling myself to breathe. I thought about a box of personal items in a parking lot. And I thought about Claudette Warwick saying, "We don't do ego here. We do good work." I kept my speech short. I thanked Claudette. I thanked Meridian. I thanked the residents of Pilsen who had let me into their lives and their neighborhood and their vision for what their community could be. And then I said something I hadn't planned. 7 years ago, I designed a project that was presented to the world under someone else's name. I spent a long time being quiet about it. I don't regret the silence entirely. because it forced me to build something that couldn't be taken, a body of work that was undeniably, documentably mine. But if there is anyone in this room who is working in the background right now, doing the real work, carrying the weight of it quietly, I want you to hear me. The work knows. It always knows. And eventually, it finds its way home. The applause that followed was long and warm. I walked back to my seat. My father was standing. The day after the ceremony, Claudette and I had breakfast at a diner near the hotel. Over coffee and eggs, she told me that the Columbus Development Group had formally offered me the lead design role on the public housing project. The contract Brooke had spent 2 years pursuing. The project that would break ground in the Linden neighborhood. The same neighborhood where this whole story had started 8 years ago, when I stayed late and came in on weekends to design something for people who needed it. I sat with that for a moment. The symmetry of it was so complete that it almost felt unreal. But it wasn't a movie. It was just what happens sometimes when you do the work and protect the record and survive long enough for the truth to catch up. I told Claudette I needed a few days to think. She nodded. "Take your time," she said. But not too much time. I called my father on the drive to the airport. He had already made it back to Westerville. He sounded tired but steady. "Your mother wants to call you," he said. "She's been thinking." "I know," I said. "I'll be ready." "She loves you, Mara. She just always thought Brooke needed more from her. She didn't understand that you needed things too." "I know that, Dad. I'm proud of you," he said. I should have said that more. I'm saying it now. I drove the rest of the way to the airport in comfortable quiet. My mother called on a Sunday. Patricia Ellison had never been a woman who found it easy to be wrong. She had spent her whole life moving forward, not looking back. But she called on a Sunday, and she was on the phone for 40 minutes, and she spent most of it listening. I told her the real story, all of it, without softening anything. She cried once. Not dramatically, just a small, surprised sound, like she had reached for something in the dark and found it wasn't where she thought it was. When I finished, she said, "I didn't protect you the way I should have." I told her that was true. "I kept thinking you were the strong one," she said. "You always seemed so steady. I didn't look close enough to see what the steadiness was costing you." We talked about Brooke. Brooke was on leave, in therapy, dealing with the unraveling of a professional identity she had built on borrowed credibility. It was hard. I didn't feel victorious about it. But I didn't feel guilty either. What was happening to Brooke was the result of choices Brooke had made, long before the committee made their findings. My mother asked if I would ever talk to Brooke again. I said I thought so, eventually, when both of us were ready. I accepted the Columbus contract, I told her near the end of the call. Silence. Then, the Linden neighborhood? Yes. Another silence. "Mara," she said softly. "That's yours. That was always yours." Yes, I thought. It was. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 32 years old. This past April, I stood on a vacant lot in the Linden neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, with a set of architectural drawings under my arm and looked at the space where something is about to be built. A central atrium. A rooftop garden. A ground floor clinic. A community center for people who were told for decades that they didn't deserve one. The same design I drew at a kitchen table 8 years ago. I had Claudette beside me. I had the Hartwell Foundation's project coordinator beside her. And 2 rows back, standing slightly apart from the group the way he always does, I had my father. He had driven down without being asked. Brooke and I have spoken twice since the ceremony. Short calls, careful, honest. There is a lot of distance still between where we are and where I hope we might eventually get to. But the door is not locked. I left it open because I believe people can change when the weight of what they have done becomes heavier than the comfort of pretending they haven't. I don't know if she will walk through. That is up to her. What I know is this. I spent 7 years being invisible because it was safer than fighting in a space where the rules were stacked against me. And then I spent 7 years building something that could not be denied. The award on my office shelf is not the point. The building going up in Linden is the point. The work is always the point. It was mine from the beginning. It just took the world a little while to catch up. If you have stayed with me this long, I want to ask you one honest question. If the person who stole from you finally said sorry, years too late, with everything already falling apart for them, would that be enough? Or would you need more? Tell me in the comments. I will be reading every single one.